Now let's check in on the MLS weekend, including a debut for David Beckham's son, Romeo. We are joined once again, I'm pleased to say, live by Calen Carr. Good afternoon to you, Calen. Good morning, your time. I have to start with Inter Miami. Their impressive turnaround in form ended in style by the New York Red Bulls. A 4-0 defeat after 5 wins in their last 6. What do you make of that? Was it a reality check for Phil Neville when it looked like the momentum had switched in the right direction?
Yeah, I think this was more of a case of heavy legs. They had put so much into this stretch to turn around their season, 6 games unbeaten on the bounce, and then had to go play against a Red Bull team, which, if you know anything about Red Bull football anywhere in the world, it's basically the last club you would want to play against when you're lacking some energy. And Red Bulls really jumped on them from the beginning, got on top of them. First half red card for Figal for Inter Miami did not help their cause. And from there, it went south quickly, 4-0. And that's the danger for this Inter Miami side, is they've done so well to turn things around, and Neville has done a good job with this side, but they seem fragile to me. They seem a little bit vulnerable, and when they lose their confidence in a big match like this, it'll be really important for them midweek at home against Nashville to see how they respond.
What have you made of Phil Neville's coaching? A big transition from the England women's team for him?
Look, I think he's had an adjustment period. We've seen a lot of foreign players, when you come to a new league, especially Major League Soccer, have trouble adjusting, and they've had a lot of those with some of the biggest names, with Higuain and Matuidi, who've taken a long time to settle in, and only just this season started to show a little bit of their form and class. And I think the same thing holds true for a manager. It's very difficult. You look at the roster regulations, the travel. They'll play games everywhere from the humidity of Houston, where I played, to turf in Vancouver. It's no easy proposition, and I think he's done a good job being able to get the side just sort of figuring out who they are and competing. The question is whether that will be enough. They're 3 points back from the final place in the playoffs right now, with about 8 games to go, but 4 of their next 5 are on the road. So this next, I'd say, month or so is really going to decide the fate of Inter Miami for the season. Yeah,
as you say, a massive country. So short term, it's up in the air for Inter Miami, but long term, off the pitch, big news. David Beckham increasing his stake and investment. How important is that for Inter Miami, and I suppose MLS as a whole? And what do you see his ambition being for the coming years?
Well, I think it's clear to say that it has not lived up to his standard, or I think probably what the league would have expected when you've come into and you have a team in the market like Miami, and you have an owner with the size and profile and ambition of a David Beckham. And it's been really disappointing when you look throughout the tenure of this club. It's a young history so far, and yes, you have to say with the caveat that it began during a global pandemic, which has obviously affected the transfer market, who we could bring in, and how it would go. But I do think that this is a good thing. We've seen David Beckham kind of take the reins, move here, be more involved in the club, reportedly around the club day to day, which is really good. I think the question is just, have they done enough damage at this point where they've lost some faith in the community? The fans are not necessarily showing up to the same measure as you would have hoped, and just the results have not been there to the point where you would expect them to be to this point. But I think there's still a massive, massive potential for this club.
Yeah, anecdotally, Calen, just from here in the UK, I understand Florida's got a big hotbed of high school soccer. Is there a feeling that Inter Miami is maybe not quite garnered the attention it should have done, and perhaps they can do in terms of the community you mentioned there?
I think that does take time. It does take time to build an academy system. You have to remember, this is essentially just starting a club from scratch. So there really is no infrastructure. There is no history. There is no pedigree, other than some big names at the very top. But that doesn't really always trickle down to the very grassroots level. So it will take time for them to build out that academy system, which we've seen Major League Soccer really invest heavily into. And so many clubs around the world now are selling players, are creating young domestic talent. And when you look at the profile of the type of people that are in Miami, so much Latin talent. There's basically, it's called like a gateway to South America, just based on so much immigration coming through. So you would expect them to sort of bear fruit from that in the years to come.
Yeah, culturally should embrace it. Personally, a big moment for Beckham. He must have been so proud. His son Romeo making his debut for Inter Miami's reserve side, Fort Lauderdale, in the 3rd tier of US soccer, alongside Phil Neville's son Harvey. What are the expectations for Romeo? Could we see him in Major League Soccer anytime soon? And have you seen any of that Beckham right foot in him?
Well, the third division here is not highly publicized or covered very well, but just 19 years old. So, of course, you would expect him to have maybe spent some time around some top players in his life growing up, obviously, most notably with his father. But, I think it's a nice moment. It's a nice story for the family. But I do think it does go back to the questions around this club a little bit, which is it doesn't have the pedigree, it doesn't have the reputation so much to say that nepotism is not involved. And that was a charge that was placed against David Beckham at a certain point in time when he hired Phil Neville, coming in saying, oh, you've hired your mate to come over and manage the side. And now I think Phil Neville is showing some of his quality. But that's going to be a question that you're going to have to face for Inter Miami in the future. And then when you have, his son and others in the club, and we mentioned some of the youth players that could be profiled or could be picked for the team, and then they're not playing, that's going to raise some questions. So I think it does sort of indicate a larger issue maybe for Inter Miami as far as how they're managing and what type of strategy they're implementing as far as how they want to build their club.
Big pressure on those players as well, those young men with those family connections, as you say. Now, we're coming into the final run towards the playoffs, just a few weeks left of the regular season. It's interesting with all sports to have this postseason in terms of momentum. Who are your tips to make a late run for the playoffs, and who should be most worried about keeping their space for the postseason? Who perhaps is running out of steam?
Well, I've been a bit critical of Inter Miami here, but I do think that they have something to say when it comes to the playoffs. They've been on a good run of form. I think if they can kind of find their footing a little bit in this next match against Nashville, they've done pretty well on the road. I think 4 wins, 4 draws, and 3 losses during the season, so that they can go on the road and get results. I would say Philadelphia looks a little bit fragile, as well as Montreal, if you were looking for a team to maybe give up their spot for Inter Miami. And then on the Western Conference, Dallas just lost their manager. Luchi Gonzalez was just fired over the weekend. He's done a fantastic job of developing young talent. Pepe is one of the biggest talents right now in Major League Soccer, will likely be sold. The young American striker, Ricardo Pepi, will likely be sold to Europe, I would imagine, this winter for quite the fee. But they've lost a lot of talent this season, and the manager then falls down. So LAFC is the other one to watch. They look dangerously close to missing the playoffs right now.
Okay, Calen, fascinating to talk to you as well, get your insight. Thank you for now.
Thanks.